All right. So we've done one episode so far. Let's get rolling. Let's get rolling. Gosh. All right. Let me get this stuff synced up. Okay. So, like I said in the previous video that I put out, talking about how last time I did this was pretty scripted, and I think the problem with that is I just tend to get really stiff. So I kind of have my general idea what I want to talk about. So where we last left off in episode 1 was acceptance and starting off school. So once you get into the school and you're accepted in BSSM, when you get to Reading, we're going to kind of cover today what that first week looks like. And again, I know it seems like we're inching along here at snail's pace, but first week has a lot to cover. And then we'll start getting further and further into it. But the first couple months are really big. The first week really being one of the biggest. And so I'll kind of break down my experience was like, what I did, what happened, and how it broke down. So like we ended with, you're required to read When Heaven Invades Earth. So that's one of the first big things. If you haven't read When Heaven Invades Earth, you don't know about it. That's one of like the pillars of Bethel's theology. Now there's a thing that's been addressed time and time again. And when they did Bethel Revisited, they talked about it again there. But this is really the big thing, is the canonical understanding of Christ within Bethel, and I think is a huge part of their theology. Now Bill's going back trying to explain it, saying he does agree that Jesus was God, but then he also has preached after that saying that Jesus has performed miracles as man. And this is kind of the big linchpin, cornerstone, really dividing line with Bethel. I think that people got to work with. So we'll address that and we'll keep going. So right off the bat, and When Heaven Invades Earth, it's in the first like 15, 20 pages. And I wish I still had all my copies. I had like over 30 or 40 books from Bethel. But I'll be listing them and going over them as we come across them. But in the first few pages of When Heaven Invades Earth, it talks about, and Bill has said this in sermons too. I'll see if I can find the audio clips, where he said stuff like, one of the big things is that if he believes that Jesus has performed miracles as God, he's reduced to a spectator. But if he believes that Jesus has performed miracles as a man in right relationship or perfect relationship with God, he now has a responsibility to walk that out. Now that is as a general synopsis, but that is the big part of it. So Bill does preach this, that Jesus was a model for us to perform miracles. That's the idea. That Jesus was the example of what a fully man, not God, but just what man in perfect relationship with God can do. Now, again, we'll get back to the Bethel part, but just kind of the question I ask people a lot now when they're kind of the charismatic camp, I ask, did Jesus perform miracles as man, as God, or as man and God? And you'd be surprised how many charismatics will say, well, he performed miracles as man. And it's like, well, yes, he did, but it's man and God. And the reason why I say man, a lot of them will say man, is because this theology that Bill pushes of how Jesus performed miracles as a man in perfect relationship with God. How they use that I think it's Philippians 2 or Philippians 4, how he emptied himself. They use that as an explanation of how Jesus completely emptied himself of all divinity, even of being God. But the question is, when did God change? Because we know that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so he can't not be God at any point, which is a big thing. So, all right, so you have to read When Heaven Invades Earth. And that's kind of laying the foundation of your theology of Bethel. You got to read that. And there's also a book report they have to do on it. It's like a questionnaire you have to fill out. And so they want to know that you read it. So I got to Bethel about a week before school started. And this time Reading, I stayed at apartments. I believe it was Smoke Tree Apartments. I believe it was right across from the Food Max, if I remember correctly. Now, I live with three other guys. So it was 4 guys, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Rent was like, I think my rent between all of them was like $350 a month. So my rent was next to nothing. Paper thin walls, rice and bean in it. But I had no vehicle. And so I rode with my buddy, to school, to church, the first church service. Now, mind you, I've never heard any of Bill's sermons. I'd never listened to Jesus Culture. I didn't know anything about Bethel. I literally was just like, let's get off the boat and into California kind of thing, and just go to California. So I didn't know anything about this. So we get to church. The church isn't as big as I thought it was going to be. It was very much a smaller church, because there were some churches even at my hometown that felt bigger. So I was surprised by that. But there's kind of like the main parking lot, the big hill you go up with all the nation's flags, the alabaster house or the prayer house on the left, and then you have the main school, the main sanctuary with the parking lot, glass doors, Hebrews cafe. There's a long hall, fireside room in the right. That's where second year met, and the first year's met in the main sanctuary. At least while I was there, we met in the main sanctuary. At this point, class was maybe 300 or 400 students. I don't think we were that big. Maybe 500. I don't think it was 500. I think it was like 450. But we're going to church, and so it's first church service. And mind you, I grew up in a very small town, and so for me, I thought like going to the my first question was like how to get on the worship team. Again, not knowing how big of a deal Jesus Culture, Brian, Jen Johnson were all becoming, I didn't know this. So my first day at the church, I literally just walk right up to the stage. Like I walk onto the stage, and I just say, "Hey, how do you get on the worship team?" And there's like Kim Walker, Chris Keelall, all these people were there, Jeffrey Cundy, and they're like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a student." They're like, "What are you trying to do?" It's like, "I'm trying to get on the worship team." They're like, "Yeah, you gotta wait till school starts and all that stuff." And I didn't really think much of it. I made a total fool of myself, but thankfully, I didn't know. Also, I was wearing a shirt that said "Poop on Satan." I got a youth conference, and I digged everywhere I could. So Bethel used to have a social media thing called Been Up To, and it was kind of Bethel School of Supernatural Ministries Facebook. And I made a Facebook, my little Been Up To page, and Benny Johnson saw my shirt, and she loved it. It was my first day at the church, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I love your shirt. Are you a student?" I said, "Yeah." Took a picture with her. I searched far and wide for it, still trying to find it. I can't find it, but it was like the big deal. I got a picture of Benny Johnson day one with my Poop on Satan shirt. She loved it. Anyways, so first day, had a sermon. I didn't really think much of the service until we did the fire tunnel. So right off the bat, there was fire tunnels, and like that was like, this is before school even started. And I thought, because at my church we did fire tunnels, I was like, sure, I'll go jump in. So I went to go join the fire tunnel to pray for people. I got pulled aside immediately. It's like, listen, you can't minister to people until you're in second year. You have to be like, because I'm used to a very small town church. So I'm like, just go up there and pray. You are not allowed to pray for people, minister to people, prophesy to people until you're cleared halfway through first year or you're a second year student. And everyone has their tags. We all have name tags that have first year, second year, third year on there. You can see who's who. I didn't have a name tag yet because school didn't start. I never really was one to get like drunk in the spirit. I know I always saw people around me. And for me, I was always like, I would get excited and it was more emotional than actual physical. But I never really got like quote unquote drunk in the spirit where I was like uncontrollable laughter. And this is kind of a theme for me throughout the Bethel school because we'd have people coming in and doing this. And I would have to either fake it or I would eventually my reasoning was I just have a really big barrel. It takes a lot for me to get drunk. And I just never got really drunk in the spirit. Now I would have moments of like, I would feel like total peace or like humility or like I would be crying and I just a really tender moment, I guess you say, in the Lord. But I never got like the crazy drunken laughter. I got denied doing the fire tunnel, got no big deal. I didn't think much of it. Met some second year students that are really cool. Got to connect with some other first year students. Had some great connections. Went home. Basically got ready for school for that week. And we started. We get there. And it's just a worship service. And so Brian Johnson's leading worship with Jen Johnson's the A team. We call them the A team, which is like all the top people are playing drums. Playing the worship team, full out, just awesome team. And we have worship for like an hour and a half for right away. It's just like everyone's hungry, everyone's there, and it's just like wild worship for an hour and a half right off the bat. But your first week of school is all about just kind of orientation, finding out, okay, what we're going to be learning about. They kind of break down who the teachers are, who you need to know. I want to say it was Mark Brown. It could be a different last name, but Mark was the head of first year. He had a background as a plumber, and then eventually became the superintendent for first year, I guess. I don't know how he got there, but he did. You would hear him speak a lot. We'd hear from Bill Johnson a lot, from Chris Valentin a lot. Chris is actually the head of the school, if you guys don't know. Bill technically doesn't have a role in the school, but Chris is like the actual, school was his ideas, but Bill will obviously speak at it. Then Eric Johnson would speak a lot. Sometimes we'd get Brian, we'd get Jen. Sometimes we get Gabe Valenzuela, who's one of the second year. I think he's the second year director now. Sometimes you get other Revival Group pastors speaking. Ben Armstrong, he's the guy who speaks at Bethel a lot. He was a Revival Group pastor for a while. Class with Heidi Baker, and there's plenty of clips of like, we would Heidi and Roland sometimes, and we would just be people getting drunk in the spirit, praying, and sometimes I would go for 2-3 hours. Like there was this structure, but also utterly and totally disorganized. the first bit was a little just like, it was kind of like drinking from a fire hose, because you're establishing small groups or your revival groups, and then Thursday's your revival group breakout day, and then you have small groups in your revival groups and just all kinds of stuff. So that first week is just getting everything ironed out. We're learning our schedule, learning the books we're going to be reading, getting copies of a lot of our books. So they would disperse a lot of the books as it was time to read them. Sometimes you get some ahead of time. If there's a new release, a lot of times we'd get that. So like Benny Johnson's Happy Intercessor came up, or when Bill Johnson's Strengthen Yourself in the Lord came out, we got that. But that was kind of the idea. So once you get the idea of school, then you eventually meet with your revival group in person. This is kind of like your core within the school. So you have like the main school, and then you have your revival group. Now your revival group has people that you're going to be being held accountable with, you're going to be doing life with, that you're going to have like almost like a small church within a church. You meet weekly with. A lot of times you meet at your RGP's house. It was like a core group. We would do lunches together, dinners together, all kinds of stuff. My revival group pastor was John K. Lehinahumoku. I'll say it one more time. John K. Lehinahumoku. And his wife was Barbara K. Lehinahumoku. And they both had their own revival groups, but we'd meet together a lot. And then within your revival group, you would then vote for small groups. You would be assigned a group, guys with guys, girls with girls. And then you would vote within your small group who would be the small group leader. And then that person was kind of an arbitrary vote, just kind of pray about it, and whoever got voted. And then from there, that person then would become that would lead, like, you would have Bible studies weekly with this group. So like our small group met weekly, and we had Bible studies together, and we prayed together and dreamed together, did all of our stuff. That was like our small group. Now, the revival group I was in had a couple people in there that you may be familiar with. One of them being Stephanie Frizzell, who's now Gretzinger. Love her to death. She's amazing. I had honestly still her brother was actually my roommate in second year. Love that guy to death. We still text every now and then. Love these people. That's something to be aware of as we're going through these things, is that, like, it's hard for me to talk about a lot of this because I'm not like buddies, but I know them, and I see their stuff on Instagram and Facebook, and like we would still cross paths even after Bethel, and like I haven't like called them up and talked to them and stuff, but like, I lived with some of these people for quite a while, and so I still have a hard time, to just be fully transparent, I still have a hard time with the idea of, like, I have a hard time calling Bethel a cult sometimes, and like I forget who I was talking to, is another YouTuber I was talking to a little bit, and he's like, he kind of broke it down to me. I'm like, you're right. You're right. And he just stung when he said that. And it made me realize just how close I still am to this, because I still feel that. Like, I have a hard time calling Bethel a cult still. Even though he explains, like, listen, it meets all the criteria. I'm like, you're right, it does. And I see it. It's just, I still personally, just honest with you guys, I have a hard time calling it a cult. Like, I do. Not that I disagree with that label. I think it's just because it's like when you're someone who was in there for so long, it's like, man, do I call it a cult? Was I in a cult? Was I in a cult? I was in a cult. And you're like, God, that's weird to say. It's weird to think about. And it's hard to process. And you're like, there's a part of you that's like super thankful by God's grace you're out of it. But another part of you is like, gosh, what happened? How'd I get there? So yeah. But so you have your revival groups and get together, and you kind of have, each revival group has kind of their own focus of what they do and what they go through. And that's on Thursdays. And then after worship, so you have your worship, there's kind of a small lesson, then break out for revival groups. And then it was Fridays, you had worship lesson, and then you met with small groups. And that was kind of the general week. And so once you got that figured out, at that point, you're kind of going over all the stuff all the books you're going to be reading. So like our criteria, we got the Jack Hayford Hand Bible, God's Generals. A lot of stuff we worked through was the workbooks that Chris has, so Supernatural Ways of Royalty, Supernatural Ways of Prophetic, all that stuff, and you'd go through that through school. Yeah, let's talk a bit. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is now I'm going to talk more about the outreach part and treasure hunts. So we'll start with that.